right. I am an anthropologist by background, and I work for Intel Corporation. I don't want to assume that everyone knows what Intel Corporation is or does, but it makes chips, and it is in most personal computer devices and many laptops and mobile devices. And for the purpose of this talk, it also makes components that go into devices such as high-performance computing and servers. And in terms of why an anthropologist would work for Intel, why Intel would employ an anthropologist, Intel has quite a history to hire anthropologists, and in part that is to gain insights into some of the trends within technology, or what has been called recently to an event I was at, futurology. So it's the idea of gaining a kind of a foresight into the next 5 years, now to 5 years challenges and the uses that people make of the technologies we have already on the market, but also in part because of the way Intel produces its semiconductors, its chips, with a tick-tock model, as it's called, following Moore's law. So it produces a new architecture for the chip, and after 18 months, it increases the density of the transistor on the chip, and that is tick and tock. And then it goes back to a new chip architecture. So that's 18 months, 18 months, 18 months, and therefore it has a roadmap that goes far beyond 5 years, and it has to look at emerging trends in the longer term. So we look at these two elements. I am in particular part of a group called Health and Life Sciences. And in particular, we have a lot of strategic initiatives in this field, but the particular, again, relevant for today's talk is the personalized medicine initiative. We have a team that I'm part of that is based in London at Imperial. We are hosted by Imperial College. And even though I know that the term, the expression personalized medicine is controversial, and at some extent, if you ask to a doctor, medicine is always personalized, because of course they are always trying to make it personal to the patient they have in front of them. The idea that the Health and Life Science group has of personalized medicine is of leveraging as much as possible information around the patient to try to enable the delivery of as much as possible tailored care to the patient. And of course, two of the large trends in this field are coming. One, let's say, more top-down from science with genomics, and again today I will talk about genomics, but generally I mean also proteomics and transcriptomics and metabolomics and all the other similar life science fields. And that is a new data, so to speak, or relatively new, that is coming into possibly clinical applications. And then another disruptive data type, let's say, is coming more bottom-up and is more patient-generated, and therefore a trend again of patients maybe coming to doctors or to their healthcare professional with data that they generated through technology devices, diaries, and therefore how those two kind of high data throughput are then considered at the point of care. So I've been talking about data, and so I'm gonna use the big data word. And there is a joke at Intel that every time you say big data over a call, you have to pay £10. So please don't say I said it. But I know that it has big limits, and it's used to mean almost anything out there. But I study data scientists in a way, and from a technical point of view, big data is still used to define certain challenges. And the simplest definition of big data that technicians use is the 3V definition. And you have to tick 2 of the V's to have a big data problem. The 3 V's are very well known. They are volume, variety, and velocity. And therefore, if you tick 2 of those boxes, you have a big data problem. Now, big data are much more complex than this, and I don't want to simplify them too much. And I think, for example, Dana Boyd and Kate Crawford did a great job in trying to find some of the other characteristics that big data have. One of which is their interconnectedness. They make sense once you have a large interconnected network. So, of course, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. I'm talking about big data in this context because today, as Nature tells us, in modern biology, every week is a big data week. And in fact, from my point of view, from trying to study the community who uses our technologies, for example, big data is a definition that I use relationally. So I say that somebody has a big data problem if they don't have the tools or the infrastructure to solve that problem. That is not new in biology. Big data or data problems have been in biology since always. There is a wonderful paper by Muller-Wheeler and Charpentier on nails, and his challenges on paper to create the first philologies around biology. So data problem or overload is not new in biology, and it's also not new the computational aspect of it, because computers have been used in biology since computers exist. So what is new about the idea of a big data problem within the scientific community? Well, one of the interesting things for me is the perception that there is a problem. So the idea that there is either lack of tools or lack of skills to tackle the problems at hand. And the skills that are most highlighted as missing are the traditional, hard ones, statistics, mathematics, and programming. And of course there is a value attribution here that these are more valuable skills than others, but they impact the way this community of users perceive their work and their ability to deal with these new challenges that these new sequencers, for example, produce. So one of the issues is that the tools they use are quite sophisticated. This is an example of high-performance computing cluster. So again, to simplify it a lot, this is a Core i5, so it has about 5 or 6 cores to run this laptop. These scientists work on clusters that have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 cores. So these are very powerful machines, and they need to be tailored to the task that these scientists want to accomplish. The interesting part is that most biologists are not trained in computer science. They are trained in biology. And therefore you end up with this split of biology between the wet lab and the dry lab. And by wet lab, of course, I mean the bench work, the chemical part of the genome understanding, and by the dry lab, I mean the computing lab, and therefore the informational understanding of the genome. And at some extent, the science, as I call it in the title, is hybrid. It requires quite sophisticated level of understanding of both sides. And this is just to give you some of the background so if the data come from a sequencer, they need to be checked for quality control, they need to be aligned, they need to be mapped, and then they're sent off to the bioinformatician, and these require quite sophisticated computing skills. Then they're sent off to the bioinformaticians for analysis, but for the analysis, the bioinformatician doesn't not only need to know the computing infrastructure is using, it also needs to know the experiment, because without the experiment, it is impossible to analyze the data. And then, even if you manage to kind of analyze this data, then you might want to develop new tools to do it faster, better, more efficiently. And then you require higher computing skills. And then there is the curation part, and for that you need both computing skills and biology, because you need to create ontologies for curations and so forth. You got the idea. But some of the challenges, therefore, is of the expectations of these two elements to be completely separated, Well, in reality, they need to be merged. And they work better in the little fieldwork I've been doing when the wet lab and the dry lab collaborate intensively, because the gap between these two, let's say, tribes, since I'm a cultural anthropologist, or cultures, is very large. So if we want to use more about STS definition and use Kuhn, we can say that they work under entirely different paradigms. Thank you very much. So, while biology is still more qualitative at some extent, computing is completely standardized and qualitative. And therefore, while each experiment is unique and each cell is unique, computer scientists can't cope with that diversity. They need replicability, and replicability in mathematical and computer sense is not replicability in biological sense. So even the language, even when they use the same words, they mean very different things. So I want to conclude by saying that, okay, so also I skipped a bit of a slide because I'm running late, but of course it's also a fast-moving science, and there is emerging tools, open source tools coming out every day, and that is to tailor the computing to the biology, but at the same time it's also driven by academia, who requires, for example, PhD students to come up with new codes to finish a PhD. So I wanted to focus today, in part because Alex asked me, on the 5 years span futurology exercise, and therefore look at my current user and how they use technology that they currently have. And of course they work under the assumption, which most of us have, that we have technologies that are much more powerful than we use them, and therefore that there is a gap between how they use them and how they could use them. So there is also an ideology of speed as well as novelty in increasing that. But also, I think there is something else that I find interesting. We tend to imagine infrastructure as very fixed, because the word infrastructure comes from, you know, our sewage system, our road system, and so we tend to think of computing infrastructure as fixed, while we tend to think of data as liquid. So they have been defining things as liquid gold, as valuable, as moving around. And software is something in between that is relatively fixed but still malleable. But that doesn't work in this environment. The code used has to match the infrastructure. The infrastructure is very customizable and at the same time used in one way or the other according to the type of software and tools that is used. So therefore, the boundaries between the hardware, the software, and the data completely blurs. So if I have to finish mostly on the fact that here we are talking about inequality, and I've been exposed all day thinking about inequalities. Of course, there are great inequalities throughout the globe in terms of who has access to this kind of computing resources. And those inequalities are mapped by the also scientific and knowledge inequalities throughout the world. So these are infrastructure that generally are accessible to higher income countries and very high prestigious scientific institutions. But there are interesting different trends where different nationalities are rebranding themselves to cater for one or the other of these complex ecosystems. So some, for example, suggest that they are better at informatics, while others suggest that they can have a more multicultural population, therefore they would be better as partners. Others go the opposite way and advertise themselves as being more homogeneous, like, or small, like Iceland famously. And therefore, all this ecosystem has different players with different skills. And I'm not even going to say about cloud computing, but this is, of course, these services are located in one place, but they can be accessed remotely. So there is great opportunity there to make these more collaborative. Thank you. Thank you very much.